Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Monroe Center for Social Inquiry's speaker series on conspiracy theorists. This is our third installment of the semester.
So our speaker today is a celebrated philosopher at South Texas College. He specializes in a wide array of conspiracy theories, and he's going to today talk a little bit about his findings and also go into a question and answer dialogue with us at the end.
So conspiracy theories are explained away by mainstream media services each day. However, Lee will do his best to bring us away from the pop culture lens conspiracy theory and analyze and discuss in an open forum.
Yeah, Lee once wrote in his paper, Living with the Conspiracy, which we all read looking into him, that all it takes is a cognitive dive into the dark, spooky waters of conspiracy theory to reveal some of the main mysteries of Western civilization. So we hope to yield some of that today. With that being said, everyone please join us in a warm welcome for the daring and dashing Lee Basham.
You did it! Daring and dashing, yeah, okay. Hi, how's it going? Great introduction, thank you so much. I think I've been oversold, all right? But we're going to go through this stuff. We have so little time, and I could talk for hours and hours. There's so much we need to say. I mean, right now I want to launch into a discussion of Joe Usinski, who's going to be here next week, and what he means by loser. It's not what you think. It actually makes a lot of sense. But we're going to have to do me today. Okay. So let's get this out of the way. Here we go. Okay, let's start with Tonkin. Incredibly important event in human history for the survivors and for the people who didn't. We're looking at 2 million dead. And it started with a lie that was known to be a lie, that was carefully kept a successful lie by our own United States intelligence community. Gulf of Tonkin, very briefly, was a series of attacks that didn't occur on U.S. naval vessels by the North Vietnamese. After the last of that non-occurring attack, there's actually some controversy about what didn't happen, but we know that last one didn't happen, and that's the one President Johnson pointed to when he went on national television the very next day to announce that we were, in essence, at war with North Vietnam on the basis of an attack that didn't occur. Now, we don't know if Johnson realized it didn't happen, but we do know the people who told him about it realized it didn't happen, and they were nevertheless willing to tell him that. And these are intelligence community professionals, probably numbering, if not in the dozens, perhaps even in the hundreds. So these secrets are controllable, even when large numbers of people are privy to them. Hanyoke himself is an NSA guy, and years later, the National Security Administration wanted to find out exactly how did this go. Yes, the attack didn't occur. Yes, it launched the Vietnam War, which in the end was disastrous for us. But what exactly were the sequence of events so that this lie became defining of national policy? So they got out their secret archives and they started digging through it. Hanyoke was given access to this as their official historian, and he gives us this passage. When you talk to Robert, he's actually more aggressive than what we have here. And he says exactly what I just told you. The intelligence community wanted this war, and they had to motivate it. And so they didn't have to wait too long for a story to appear. And you have to wonder, too, what's the next coming war, at least right now, according to what I'm told, what we're all told? Yeah. Oh, yeah, now we'll be talking. We can talk back and forth. It's not that official. Yeah, North Korea, right? And so you've got to wonder, do we really need North Korea to attack us if we want to have a war with them? What do we need?
We need to attack them without them knowing it.
Well, that'll work. I think they'll notice after a moment. But but you're right. All we need is to be able to say with some credibility, to have the TVs, the flat screens all over our wonderful land, and in Europe fire up with the report that the North Koreans have gone too far. They freaked out. They shot down a B-1 bomber. They torpedoed an American naval vessel, and the war is on. And the questions will only be asked later. Now, here's where things get really kind of scary. We like to believe This is an article almost of religious faith, a piety of our society, that we have mechanisms in place, highly effective, not 100% reliable, but highly effective mechanisms to make sure that if extremely dangerous, world-shaping conspiracies are engaged in by, for instance, our government, very powerful government, those are likely to be revealed. And the reason is we have these two institutions at work that are motivated almost entirely by revealing the truth to the public. That's what they're there for. And these we know as mainstream media and national law enforcement. The idea is that their main motive is to reveal these things to the public. That's their role in democracy, to keep power accountable through information. So when power becomes extremely and deadly in its abusiveness, they'll be caught. This has two things. It is accountability. It has that power. It's two things going for it. But it also has the preventative power. Don't go there. You will be unmasked. And we will march into wherever you're at, say the White House, and we will arrest you. Imagine the power of walking into the Oval Office and saying, "Sir, I'm from the FBI. You're under arrest." Okay, and then perp walk you out in front of the waiting media, put you on trial, and give you the needle. That's the theory. I call this the public trust approach, and it was first put into a really rational and convincing form by our sponsor here, Dr. Brian Keeley, in an excellent paper in the Journal of Philosophy, one of the, if not the most prestigious journals of philosophy on earth, in 1999. This man, it's his fault, okay? I'm his fault. Blame that one. And it set into motion a huge debate that has become probably the fastest growing, and I would definitely argue the most fascinating new branch of philosophy to come along in many decades. Because just like most people, for many, at least in American philosophy, decades, this was the dominant view. Well, you've got the media. They're going to protect you. And national law enforcement will catch these creeps too. Does it work that way? If we're going to judge this idea that the dominant motives are revelation, we're going to have to weigh that judgment against other motives. Are there other motives at work that animate our information system? And then we can decide when this is a reliable mechanism, public trust, and when it is actually predictably extraordinarily unreliable. So let's do an inventory. My concern is that when we do this inventory, we're going to come up against the problem of toxic truths. These are truths that are fundamentally damaging and destabilizing to our society in various ways. Truths that, when applied to a hypothesis, suppose a certain kind of conspiracy, yield almost immediate and very easily predictable consequences for the people who might want to investigate that. National law enforcement, mainstream media. So let's use the example that's so common. Did the federal government blow up the World Trade Center? We got a yes. We've got a yes. Okay, where are the no's? How many of you think it did? The federal government blew up the World Trade Center, controlled demolition theory. It's okay, you're safe here. Nobody's going to watch this, nobody cares. Well, I guess a few people care. Thank you for coming. Okay, I got a yes. Okay. How many people are quite confident the federal government did not blow up the World Trade Center? Interesting. Let's try this in another way. How many of you are really not sure? You don't know? Oh, some of the same hands. I like that. I like that. You don't get caught in this either or. That's the scariest answer of all. You're really not sure. You should know. You should be able to know that. And you don't. At least you think you don't. Well, I want you to pretend, even if it might be kind of weird. Remember, this is philosophy. We're here for fun. I want you to have some fun and pretend that the World Trade Center was blown up by the federal government and that even a cursory professional investigation into that reality that we're pretending is real. Remember, we're pretending, guys. Would have shown that. Question, would the investigation ever have occurred? Or is that a truth that's just too toxic to tell? Maybe. Let's go. Boink. Toxicity is not the idea, and I'm going to make this up front, is you hang on to this thought. Toxicity is not the idea the federal government's on the phone to CNN and saying, don't cover this. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about direct control. It's not the idea that some cabal in the executive branch and the Pentagon has told the FBI to stand down. Direct control. We're not playing that game. We're asking something much more interesting. We're asking if it's predictable, no phone calls required, no weird threatening pictures need apply. We're asking if you can predict, given the nature of mainstream media, in the context of our society, given the nature and function of national law enforcement, if you can predict in certain scenarios, they won't investigate certain things even though they are an obvious option for investigation and may very well be true. There's some places you just can't go, and that's the problem with toxicity. I think Gulf of Tonkin is an example of that. There was minor attempts on the part of Congress to question the claims about the Gulf of Tonkin. They were immediately squashed, both politically and in the media. It just didn't go anywhere. Nobody wanted to dig into it. Because the real issues of those days, and this brings us back to that quote from one of your earlier speakers in our series, if they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers. The issues at that time were probably, given this truth now that we know, completely the wrong questions to ask. Where do we fight the communists? Should we fight them in Vietnam? Okay, how should we fight them in Vietnam? Gulf of Tonkin just got lost. Why has this war begun in the first place? Did it really begin? This is going to be a crash course. I hope it doesn't crash, guys. Now, you got to understand, you could spend weeks of seminar time with the best and the brightest trying to explain all of these and all the ins and outs, but let's just run down so you get the list, so you get a general picture. Well, if I'm mainstream media, or national law enforcement, but let's focus on mainstream media. I'm a global capitalist corporation worth trillions of dollars and trillions to come. Is it in my interest to convince the American public, the public in Western Europe, the world if you wish, is it in my interest to convince them that the federal government just maybe a week or two or a month before killed 3,000 people in New York City? Here's why it might not, really why it might not be, excuse me. Something in the air here. You crash the economy. A lot of you don't remember, and a lot of you do remember, what it was like in the months after 9/11. It was freaky and weird. People wanted to stay at home. People didn't want to travel. I went to a conference in New Jersey, APA conference, to talk about these things. Way back then. And there were giant banners on the sides of hotels, big, beautiful hotels with empty parking lots saying, thanks for traveling. They hung the same banners over the interstates on the bridges as we went from the airport to the university there in New Jersey. Thanks for traveling. But there's nobody to thank. The interstates were empty. People were hunkered down. I made a joke today in Dr. Keeley's seminar about, listen, if something crazy looks like it's about to happen, invest in Domino's Pizza. Think about it. Because nobody's going to want to go to the store and get blown up, right? But they'll order a pizza. So you can make some money. I just gave you some money if you're willing to. If you have ears, here. Okay. Think about that. Ask Grandma for a loan. Do you really want to crash the economy? Probably not. Is it foreseeable and easily foreseeable that if you did pursue the theory that the federal government blew up the World Trade Center and convinced a large section of the American population that it did that this is so, it doesn't take rocket science to understand what you're going to do to the economy. We're going to see the society radically transformed within weeks. And again, we're talking about the usual worst case scenarios, but you have to keep them in mind when you're making these kinds of momentous decisions. Worst case scenario is civil war, global destabilization. Worst case scenario is people march on Washington by the millions, and a lot of those people are going to have guns. I won't know who would shoot first. But once the shooting starts, you've got a real problem on your hands. And they ain't going to be people aren't going to be sitting at home watching your advertising while they watch the NFL. It's madness. So why even investigate such an idea? This is the why look problem. It's not so much that you go out, you get your reporter snuck into ground zero, you see all of this evidence of melted steel and thermate or whatever you're supposed to be finding if this is true that they blew it up. By the way, I'm not saying they are guilty of that. Not by any means. Remember, we're pretending. You're not going to send those reporters there. There's no point in looking. It's a non-starter. Why look? It can't take you anywhere. Utilitarian ethics. This is just the idea that when you ask yourself, what the hell are you going to do in a tough situation, you should look at the consequences for others. In this case, for an entire society. What would happen if things did spiral out of control? If you did discover such an awesome and horrible, hideous truth? You're probably going to get a lot more people killed than died that day in New York City. There's no telling how bad it could get, but it's going to get very bad. The ethical thing to do, if we just want to look at consequences, and I'm not saying that is the right theory of what ethics is, but it's totally natural to expect people to think this way. At the highest levels of leadership, you're just going to look at consequences. You're going to say, don't go there. There's no good that can come from this. It could be a moral disaster far greater than 9/11 itself. Probably would be. It's not ethical. Turning also more completely to federal law enforcement, continuity of government is very important. Some of you will go into federal service. Some of you will go into the intelligence community, perhaps. It's very addictive. It's very seductive. And yeah, I've rubbed shoulders with these people because they're interested in the sort of things Brian, Dr. Keeley, and me are doing. They're very interested in conspiracy theory because it undermines the sovereignty of the government that they view themselves as fundamentally devoted to. I'll tell you an anecdote. You can't get a lot of anecdotes, but they're helpful. They had a conference at the Center for Intelligence and Security Studies. I was invited to give a talk similar to this one. But it was a weird audience in the sense that it wasn't a bunch of philosophy students, it was a bunch of people who are academics or just students of reality. It was mainly members of the intelligence community. And they were looking at a number of different things. This was just one of them. But about 2/3 into my talk, there was another academic in the back. It just started vibrating. He was leaning up in the corner because there wasn't a lot of room in there. There were that many spies and spooks in there. It was infested. And they were all just sort of like going, yep, yep, yep. And he's back there, and he's turning red-faced. And finally, he just shoots up his hand in the middle of the talk. And he says, and again, we're pretending 9/11 conspiracy theory is true. I was using a similar example. And then he shouts out, do you think they really could do that? And I was going to go into well, it's possible, it could happen, there's this, there's that. It's a difficult and complex question, but certainly we have to entertain the hypothesis. I was going to go blah, blah, blah like that, right? Carl Jensen, and I've asked Carl if it's okay if I use this story, and he said, well, absolutely. Carl Jensen, who worked for the FBI at a high level, one of its directors, he's sitting like in the second or third row, and he says, hey, I'll take that question, Dr. Basham. He's one of the sponsors of the conference, and so I'm like, yes, Mr. Jensen, please do. And he stands up, and he turns around, and he looks at this guy right in the eye. And there's a moment of incredible tension, because you get this ex-FBI guy. You have this person who's going, but, and he calmly, with almost a weird grin, as he spun back to sit down, he had this big grin on his face. He looked at him, he said, we can do anything we want. And then he sat down. And I thought, oh no, oh my God, game over, right? unexpected, there's this, oh, over the room. What do you think they did? All of these intelligence operatives and experts. Louder. They cheered. They were high-fiving. They're like, that's right, we can do it, yeah, that's right. I was like, whoa, oh my God. I'm not making this up. We have video of it. And I thought, oh God, this is just too good. And the guy's over there stunned, and I looked at him and said, well, let's take it from the expert. And I moved on. It's almost a holiness. There's almost a sort of sanctification that can happen when you get deeply involved, especially with the military and the intelligence aspects of the federal government or any other major nation state. And it's totally natural, completely human. Here's a question that Jensen inspired me to start asking people. Is there anything the federal government wouldn't stoop to? Is there anything the federal government wouldn't do to stay in power if they had to? Is there anything they wouldn't do? What do you think? Are there limits? Would they say, no, but we can't go there, that's just too evil? Well, is there anything they wouldn't do? What do you think? Do you think there's anything they wouldn't do? Or do you think there's nothing they wouldn't do? So this is an open secret. We all have these thoughts, but you're not supposed to talk about it. That's weird. But that's almost always the answer I get, especially in classes where people are more comfortable. We don't really know each other. But when I ask this in a seminar or in a classroom, and I haven't set them up, I haven't said, you got to be a conspiracy crazy to get anywhere in this class. I'm actually very standoffish about this. I don't really care if the theories are true because I don't have to do my job. I'm just an analyst. Okay, and no, honestly, it's great. It's a great dodge. Well, you really believe that, Dr. Basham? Well, I really don't have to, and I really don't have to not to. I don't know. What do you think? You've seen your professors do this crap to you, right? Yeah, we love it. All right. It's true. And all the arms shoot up with the question, well, do you think there's nothing they wouldn't do to stay in power? Yeah, I do. Strange. Continuity of government is a powerful feature of the world, the representational democracy system, that we live in. Continuity of narrative is a more subtle point. The idea is that when we have a severe national, an extreme national crisis, like 9/11 was, and in some weird way still remains, it lingers. You've got these two main sources of information in our information hierarchy. The first is, again, mainstream mass media. And by that all I mean things like CNN, Fox, MSNBC. If you want to go and read The Guardian or BBC, fair enough, that's part of that system too. And national law enforcement. The paradigm example being FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. What we have seen and what we should expect to see is when a crisis appears, these two sources, fundamental sources of information in our democracy, will harmonize their narratives. It's important they do this if they're going to unify a nation to action. The bumper sticker, I talked about this in the seminar earlier too. The bumper sticker that was everywhere, and now there'll be people here in the room that can tell me what it said. Right after 9/11, do you remember the bumper sticker? Same thing everywhere, coast to coast. And they were out by the millions within weeks of the catastrophe. What was the bumper sticker? Remember it? United we stand. It was the same bumper sticker everywhere. Big white thing, red letters, United we stand, and you damn well better have one on your bumper. I didn't have one. Some guy ran out at the convenience store and said, no, you need this. Put it on your car, sir. Okay, I got it. They were everywhere. They were in heaps, giant piles, at every cash register and every convenience store in the United States, for free. Now, I like to point out they were almost certainly manufactured in preparation for an unspecified event long before 9/11 occurred. They were in storage It's a perfectly general statement. It doesn't point fingers at any particular disaster, but the idea of unity. And united we stand is also kind of scary in a democracy, because what happens when people start asking questions and disagreeing? What are you not doing? You're divisive, and we need to unite. United we stand. Silence. It means shut up on that level. The second point about continuity of narrative is narratives are not only about single catastrophes, but over time. It's extremely important that you develop a pattern of more or less reliable confidence in your government and in your media at a time of catastrophe. It would be the opposite. It would be extremely unwise if you developed a pattern of expectation in the public that every time something horrible happens, it ends up they've been lied to on a fundamental level sometimes. Back to Tonkin and other examples. You've got to be really careful to maintain that ability in your society, a representational democracy, because if you don't and something really goes wrong, there is a real catastrophe that our leadership had nothing to do with, and we do need to unite around, like a pandemic, a plague of some sort. If your population has already got in their mind that every time something weird happens, there's an ulterior motive, and it's probably the government, they're up to something, you won't be able to motivate, organize, unify, and direct that population at the problem. They won't listen to you. So a continuity of narrative of reliability over time is also and equally important to maintain. So if the media goes off the rails every time this stuff happens, we won't have that, and we need that. We must be able to, whatever the truth of the crisis, stand united. And this is also easily foreseeable by anyone with even the most basic education, and certainly by people in the media, in persuasion, and in law enforcement. This last one is probably the creepiest of all, but it's real, it's very important. Trust in the conspiracy. If you did believe, for good reason, that the federal government had shot a missile into the Pentagon on that September day, had already planned and prepared the controlled demolitions of World Trade Center 1, 2, and Building 7. If you did believe that, let's pretend again. We're pretending on the basis of good evidence. This is very, very tempting. This is very seductive. I know they did it. I know it was monstrous, but they must have had their reasons. Reasons they can't tell us about, reasons they realized they couldn't convince us of the importance of. So they had to take matters in their own hand and create a crisis before a much greater crisis overwhelmed our nation, our civilization. So trust in the conspiracy, like, well, some trust in God. It's a very human and psychologically powerful maneuver. Your sister, just ran over in some apparently meaningless car wreck. And you think to yourself, God must have had a reason. It's the same psychology. All of these are factors of what I call toxicity. Factors that make revelation of extremely important truths. Revelation, when it's most important to us, in times of extreme crisis, surprisingly unlikely in our current system. The worse the crisis, the less likely. If the crisis was manufactured by our government, by our leadership, the less likely we are to ever hear about that from our dominant sources of information. Because such a truth is too toxic. That's the thesis. This is the reverse of the public trust approach, which says the more crazy and amazing and vicious the truth, the more likely it will be revealed. I'm arguing that you reach a point where it becomes much less likely it will be revealed. I call this the inversion thesis of public trust. So what we've done so far is very simple. We've taken patterns of motives and we've weighed them against each other. Motives for revelation, fairly evident. Break the big story. Make the biggest bust of the century. Reasons for non-revelation are extraordinarily powerful. I argue it's almost transparently true. They're so powerful, they're almost definitely going to overwhelm the purpose of revelation in mainstream media, the goal of revelation in national law enforcement. And what's important to note is all of this is very easy and obvious at a moment of crisis to people who control media and national law enforcement. You don't have to be some kind of subtle genius to see any of this. You can explain this honestly to an 8, 9-year-old child. And by the way, roll back into your history, who we are, who we know to be us. And you can see these same kinds of things, to some extent, working even in families. I can make up a story right now. You know, Dad's a bastard and he's a thief. And he cheats on my mom all the time. You know it, the rest of your siblings don't. But if we get divorced, money's gone. He's paying the bills. Why would I put my family through that? Yeah, I caught him, I know the truth. Shh, Mom's the word. This is all we have. This is where we live. I'm not going to crash my family. I've known he was doing this over and over for years. I've kept the secret then. I'll keep the secret now. And I don't know why Dad does this. But I bet if I really knew more, maybe it wouldn't look so bad. You get it? I just made that up on the fly. That's how intuitive and simple this stuff is. Never done that one before. Bink. Oh, sorry. Yeah, but come on, let's do it. Hollywood is here to help, right? Hollywood can rescue us from this. And you know the stories, and they're my favorite, among my favorite movies. There's always that one freelance, courageous, super person for truth. And they've uncovered the ugly truth, the vicious truth, and they'll reveal it to the world. Well, given toxicity, we can already see it's a beautiful story, but it stops at story. If mainstream media and law enforcement have already walked away, I don't care how fat and how convincing your dossier is. When you walk into the newsroom and say, I've got the proof, read it, know it. No, it's too late. They've already walked away. I don't care about that. I don't care what's in this. We're not going with that story. That is social suicide. Same with national law enforcement. Are you serious? I'm sorry, we already made those decisions a long time ago, but it's nice that you came up with this. So out of desperation, you rush home and you set up your really groovy website, and it's beautiful and it's well done, and all the da-da-da-da, and it's all there. And maybe there's a blip, but what's probably going to happen, what typically happens in cases like this, predictably happens, is firstly, hardly anyone's going to pay attention. Mass media's not going to look at it. National law enforcement's not going to look at it. And the people who do look at it have no real power. And if you do actually gain some kind of public notoriety or attention, you'll be denounced as a forger, a fake, fraud, and probably either a parasite seeking money, attention, and power, or you're just freaking crazy. You're a nutcase. It's very easy to do. And if you want to get really weird, well, then we can ruin you very easily. One thing, I'm assuming you're a male in this story. One thing almost no one can survive is the accusation of child molestation. The accusation itself almost carries instant conviction in the public eye. But that being said, suppose you're actually able to get your story out in a reputable platform. We should look to history to see what happens. Gary Webb's a great example. In some ways, he's one of my heroes. he was a guy who broke a story a long time ago, some of you will remember this, that the Central Intelligence Agency working with anti-communist elements in Central America, they were called the Contras, they were contra-communist revolution, they were against it, were bringing in large quantities of cocaine to fund their war against the communists in Central America. They were bringing in large quantities of cocaine and selling them on, and eventually they were being sold right on the streets of the United States. And this discovery that Webb was able to make had this wonderful, but also really, really kind of horrific correlation to what we call the crack epidemic. So people drew the conclusion that, wait a minute, if Webb's right, the CIA is putting crack on the streets to fund their illegal war in Central America. What happened? It's interesting what happened. This is a reputable newspaper. The Mercury News it's a good paper, and they were just giddy with excitement about this story. It's called Dark Alliance. Look it up. It's really well done. The very few mistakes there should not have overwhelmed the importance of the story. But this is not a national news media organization. In very short order, Gary Webb was his career, his reputation, and his research, his investigative journalism was destroyed by papers like the LA Times, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. He was annihilated, lost his job, lost his family, and in short order lost his life. Apparently he shot himself twice in the head with a revolver. So things can go bad for you. I don't know what to make of the revolver thing. But the main point is, hey, I can use my laser. Mainstream media has already walked away. So I think we have problems with the public trust approach, even though it's almost like a political piety of our society. First thing we know, there's lots of counterexamples to it. Lots of times when they could have investigated and they didn't, and the truth was not revealed for a long, long time. And when it was finally revealed, nobody cared anymore. Ancient history. And ancient history happens really fast nowadays in this society, doesn't it? 10 years will give you ancient history here. Didn't used to be that way, but it is now. It's begging the question that our public institutions of information really are reliable. And the arguments that they are, I think we've seen already now, are easily overwhelmed by arguments that in the greatest of crises, they're the opposite. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to get worried. But before I go on, do you have any questions about that, the problem of toxicity that we face? It's an interesting one. Yes, sir.
Is it that you view it as affecting an individual when they're deciding what information they may pursue, journalists or a collective, or who is
Both.
Both.
Yeah, both. Absolutely. Any other clarifications? How many of you are following the argument so far? It's easy. Yeah, it really is easy. That's what I love about philosophical arguments. If they're any good, they're so simple. All right. So right now, I'm going to continue, whether I'm wrong or right about this, on the assumption that public trust approach is as dead as dead. And maybe it's not. But let's just, again, pretend. I've tried to kill it. I'm going to talk about this. Because this is really what the example I'm giving is all about. Governing by crisis. If the federal government blew up the World Trade Center, and again, I'm not saying they did, don't get me wrong. We don't need to know that to know this is a problem. That's a case of governing by crisis. Can we reason about this? Can we show that governing by crisis actually makes a lot of sense in a democracy? Not so much, oh my God, we won't know, they won't tell us. It would be a catastrophe for our civilization if the truth got out. And we can see that without even digging into the truth so that we won't hear it. That's toxicity. This is different. Maybe governing by crisis is predictable and useful in a representational democracy. And if it is predictable and useful, and I can tell this with just a little bit of reflection, I suspect It has been useful, and we should predict it will happen. Our leadership can figure these things out too. What do we got? Let's look at this real simple argument. These things with numbers are called premises. They're reasons for a conclusion. We've got these two things we have to worry about. I want to focus on the nastier of the two. Number one, the crisis is directly and intentionally manufactured by, again, let's pick on our poor government. But that's just, it's an easy trope to use. We're going to focus on that. Oh, here we go. Here's our reasons. We've gotten out of this. I'm going to skip this. We've already talked about this. Here's me beating up on public trust again. Here's our history. These are examples of governing by crisis. Some of them mythical, almost certainly, but some of them are very likely. Tonkin is a great example. That looks rock solid, given mainstream historiography, mainstream history. Pearl Harbor, there's some interesting arguments about did the United States government allow the attack. It looks like we knew the attack was coming. We know that now, but at the time, that was not public knowledge. We had a large amount of information about what the Japanese were doing that the Japanese did not know we had. And it's of interest that the main targets of Pearl Harbor bombing, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, right? Remember this? Okay. I don't remember it, but right. The carriers were gone. Bizarre coincidence. The one thing the Japanese were after just happened to have left right before the attack, and it just happened to come back right after. It's very strange stuff. People worry about this in mainstream history. We're not really sure what to say, and you kind of see a parting one side and the other on this question. Some of this stuff is then we're getting into the weirder governing by crisis stories, hypotheses. The Griffin et al. Hypothesis is a real fancy way of saying alternative 9/11 conspiracy theory. The government did it. And this is an entire family of very complex views united by basic claims of intending the buildings in New York City to be destroyed, intending at least that there be an attack on the Pentagon. This thing here, Baker, is amazing. It says no plane hypothesis. What's he talking about? No planes? What does he mean, no planes? There's planes. There's lots of planes. I flew in on a plane. He claims he can show with a fairly high degree of confidence there were no planes on 9/11 crashing into buildings. That all of that live footage that we were dished out, according to Baker, dished out, all of that was faked in real time. Now this is crazy, right? And I'm supposed to be writing this paper, and I need an example of an idiot, right? I need an idiot. I need a pet idiot. And so I'm just cruising around the internet, and I remember in the back of my mind, I remember someone once said to me that there was these people who thought there were no planes on 9/11. Perfect. So I dig into it, and I go ahead and I get the little email going. I get his email, and I've got that little .edu at the end of my email, so he thinks, okay, I'll talk to this guy. Maybe he'll believe me. And he gives me his phone number. I'm driving out in the middle of nowhere. I've got hours and hours to go, and I thought, perfect. I'll give Alexander Ace Baker a call. Talk to him for 10 or 20 minutes. I'll get it down. He'll say crazy, stupid things, and I can quote that in my paper and move on to the next section. Perfect. So I call him up. My phone dies. 4 hours later. What? Okay. I don't believe he's right, but he's not stupid. He's a very interesting man, actually. He's very wealthy. He writes music for Disney. He has a lovely family, 2 beautiful daughters, a wife that thinks he's crazy, but she loves him even more. And so he's a fascinating person if you want to dig into someone interesting. Learn about Ace. I actually got to meet the man, and he lives in a mansion. I just couldn't believe it was happening. This last thing is probably the most notorious. This is the claim that, and why it's notorious, we might wonder. This is the claim that no children were shot at Sandy Hook School. Alan Lanza didn't shoot anybody because nobody was shot. This is the Sandy Hook hoax hypothesis. And it's another case of the idea of government by crisis. Why would the government want to fake a bunch of kids being shot? What do you think they have in mind? It's pretty obvious what they're up to. Why did the government want to fake a mass killing? Gun control, exactly, got it in one. Broke the code just like that. And that's what these people claim. Now, what I like about this list, and I can give you much longer ones, and my friend Dr. Dentith works on this stuff too. He's got books of this stuff. I don't want to sound like Romney, but he has binders. Okay, some of you got the joke. Those first two look fairly likely. This next one is highly controversial. When we do polling stats on it, I can predict in a different age group what people are saying. Among younger people, the 9/11 stuff is much more popular. In different countries, it's much more popular. Here in the United States, it's fairly unpopular when you look at the middle-age section between maybe late 20s and on out into the 50s. And then you have a really weird spike in some of these polls of people who are older, moving into their 60s and 70s, a really weird spike of agreement with the claim that 9/11 was an inside job. So there's really strange stuff going on here. But now let's get to, finally, what I promised you, an argument. Beep, beep, beep. Here we go. Now, these numbers number what we call premises. They're reasons for a conclusion. Let's check them out. They're real simple. Leadership in Western-style democracies must, on occasion, consider the option of governance by crisis. Why? Because it's an obvious option. Obvious means clearly seen and understood by all. We know people fake stuff. Now, the opportunities for governing by crisis are constant and numerous within Western-style democracies. And indeed, they are. That doesn't mean that they're being taken advantage of, but they're there. And this is a little bit scary, but motivates the argument. And often, governing by crisis is the most timely and effective way to get things done. And that rolls us back to that last point about toxic truths, the trust in the conspiracy, as some people trust in God, concern. Now here they're thinking to themselves as if they are God. It's a godlike mentality. The public trust approach fails to undermine many such government crisis projects. That means that the disincentive of revelation is fairly low and easily contained to a small number of people should it occur successfully. But again, it's fairly low because of the problems of toxicity. Revelation crashes the society. You can see that before you investigate. So why? Look, we're back to that. Leadership in Western-style democracies is instrumentally rational. Fancy. Oh, instrumentally rational. What the heck does that mean? Given your beliefs about how to get something and your desire to get that something, you're going to act in that way. What you think is the best way to do it, and it's something you really want to do. Well, how did you get to school today? Did anyone drive? Did you take a bus? Or you thought, I want to go to school today. Good for you. Thank you. I'm glad you showed up. No, actually, you came for my talk. No. And you thought, well, the best way to get there is, maybe I don't have a car, so I'll take the bus, because that's what I always do. That's all instrumental rationality means. If I want to go to the next slide, the best way to do it is push this little button on top. See, because if I do this one, it goes backwards. But I'm instrumentally rational. See? Okay. And here we get our conclusions from this super simple little argument. Leadership in Western-style democracies will, at many times, govern by crisis when it believes this is a superior, secure, and sustainable method of achieving the aims it aims at. Aims that cannot be as easily, if ever, obtained via lengthy democratic processes of discussion, debate, and persuasion. You're not going to be able to persuade the people to go with this. You see it as perhaps absolutely essential or certainly advantageous for whatever your background goals are. And that's when we talk about anti-democratic and illicit influences on society, on our government, through our government, right? But you're not going to be able to talk people into it. You're not going to be able to pass a law. Unleash the crisis and watch everything go your way very quickly. This leadership will at many times govern us by crisis. Now, if we can see this makes sense, they can see this makes sense. Our question is, when is it doing this? And of course, saying it's not. And when is it not doing this? Even as certain skeptics, critics, are saying it is. We're in a real pickle here, as my grandfather used to say. How can we get out? Rage. Rage will work. Or will it? Any questions about that so far? Because that's just, you follow what the reasoning is? Pretty straightforward? Good. Well, you might go, hey, whoa, 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 not so fast, Dr. B. Not so quick there. You know, you've gotten me into weird land. I don't want to be in weird land. I want to go back home to nice, normal, safe land. Come on. You don't understand our leadership. You must have had a really rough childhood because our leadership loves us. Government is love. Then they are servant leadership. A servant leadership would never do such a thing. They're here to help. Now, they're here to, protect. Now you can see how it could backfire. But the general thought is, they're nice, good people. This just isn't on the horizon in their minds. They don't think like that. But again, what if they really do believe that this is something that needs to be done for the long-term survival of the country or the larger, in our case, Euro-American Western civilization is part of? Then as good servants, right, they might have to do some ugly things. I like to compare it to a chess game. A chess game you cannot afford to lose. Sometimes, well, if you play chess, you know, they know sometimes, it's always. You have to sacrifice a few pieces to win the game. And when you have 300, 500 million pieces, sacrificing a few pawns, 3,000, 4,000 people that's chump change. And you might actually believe it's for the right and just cause. So even if we go with this servant leadership idea, which I think is pretty naive, when I ask myself, what are the motives of people who ascend to great power? People known to us, or those unknown to us. These don't typically track an altruistic, kind, loving, caring person. I believe that people who are power hungry because they love power, and they've learned how to get it. And that's not a servant. That's a slave master. We might object that the very idea of governing by crisis is viable in Western-style democracies. It's just insane. It's impossible. That's just not who we are. Now here it's a more vague idea. It's a more vague notion. I call this, and I've mentioned this phrase before in our discussion today, political piety. You just can't think that. At this point, we've fallen back down onto our knees in faith, in awe of our contribution to human history as the first and greatest democracy on the planet. And you don't want to mess with that. You don't want to mess with the goodness of that. The idea, the very concept of representational democracy is sacred. And here you're out there, you know, sabotaging it from the edges. It's beyond the pale, which is a weird way of saying it's unthinkable. It's unthinkable only if you are overwhelmed with political piety, that it has seized and taken over our minds. This is also a statement incompatible with our history, and it's one we can't back up because we already gave up on the public trust approach several slides ago. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.